It started quietly, with a simple fluctuation in data. Just another day at the Global Observatory, where hundreds of scientists monitored cosmic radiation, watching the regular pulses of solar activity as they streamed across Earth's atmosphere. A solar flare had been detected, yes. Nothing out of the ordinary, but something about this flare felt different. It was stronger, more persistent. It didn't dissipate in the usual pattern. Instead, the cosmic radiation lingered, spiking again and again, unlike anything they'd ever seen. First, it was written off. Temporary anomaly. A blip in the data caused by interference. Perhaps a minor flare amplified by a cosmic event. But days passed, and the radiation didn't fade. It increased. Each day, more data streamed in, and it became clear that this wasn't a short-lived flare. It was something else entirely. The question wasn't just about what was happening above Earth. The data showed that the radiation wasn't only impacting the atmosphere. It was penetrating much deeper. Far deeper than they'd expected. It was reaching into the ocean depths. Marine biologists, astrophysicists, and oceanographers were called in to analyze the unexpected intrusion. As the research expanded, strange patterns began to emerge. It wasn't just that the ocean was absorbing radiation, it was reacting. Small disturbances in temperature, unexplained fluctuations in marine behavior. Fish were moving erratically, some darting in tight circles, others in strange syncopated patterns. Not in the natural ways fish reacted to environmental changes, but something different. As if their instincts had shifted suddenly. Altered. The same behavior was reported in creatures living at great depths, where light could hardly penetrate and where radiation had never been an issue before. There were reports of previously undisturbed species appearing at the surface, their migrations pushed by unknown forces. And then came the reports of aggression. Normally solitary creatures, deep-sea predators like the giant squid, had begun exhibiting behaviors that were unusual for their kind. Territoriality, even group behavior. Normally, these creatures would never interact in groups, but now there was an uptick in sightings of larger groups of them, acting in sync. It wasn't just that they were moving differently, it was their attitudes too. Something about the radiation was making them more aggressive, more willing to fight over territory. Marine biologists were baffled. No one had seen anything like this before. It wasn't supposed to happen. Radiation wasn't meant to affect animal behavior like this. At least not on this scale. The real shock came when the geneticists began their analysis. Marine life had always adapted to the ocean's depths, evolving slowly over eons to live in near impossible conditions. High pressure, no light, temperatures near freezing. But with the new radiation levels, everything changed. They began to notice something off in the physiology of certain deep-sea species. Fish, crustaceans, even cephalopods were exhibiting rapid changes in their genetic makeup. They hadn't evolved for millions of years, yet suddenly, these creatures were showing signs of accelerated adaptation. They were adapting to the radiation. Some species that had once been frail, withering in the high-pressure environments, were now exhibiting enhanced strength and resilience, physical attributes they had never had before. Others were growing larger, their metabolisms faster, reacting in ways that suggested they were being revitalized by the radiation, as if it were a missing ingredient in their evolutionary chain. But the most startling discovery came when one marine biologist, Dr. Laura Fields, analyzed the newly altered deep-sea creatures under a microscope. What she found left her speechless. Genetic markers that had been dormant for millennia, fossilized genes, were now activated. Genes that had been marked for extinction were now reawakening. Creatures once thought to be extinct were coming back to life. The radiation was not just altering behavior, it was altering the very fabric of their biology. As the days passed, it became clear that something larger was happening. The radiation wasn't just affecting individual species, it was affecting the entire ocean ecosystem. What had been thought to be a stable, slow-moving world was now in flux. Species were changing faster than ever before. Evolution was happening in real time. Theories began to emerge, each more terrifying than the last. Perhaps the radiation wasn't just a random spike. What if the energy wasn't merely awakening ancient DNA? It was forcing it to evolve, to adapt, to become something new. Dr. Fields began theorizing that the cosmic radiation wasn't just a fleeting event. It was programming the ocean's ecosystem, altering life's trajectory. The creatures that had been buried in the depths, out of sight, were now being recalled by the energy, recycled from the evolutionary dust. The strange behavior, the aggression, the rapid changes in genetic structure, it all pointed to one horrifying possibility. The ocean's forgotten creatures weren't just reacting to the radiation, they were becoming it. The radiation wasn't just awakening them, it was rewriting them. And as Dr. Fields stood before her microscope, her mind racing with the implications, a thought crept into her consciousness. What if these creatures had never been meant to exist? What if we were awakening something that was never supposed to be brought back? The discovery was both exhilarating and terrifying. Every day, marine biologists delved deeper into the altered marine life, collecting specimens and analyzing genetic samples, trying to understand the full extent of the radiation's effect on the ecosystem. The initial changes seemed innocent enough. Minor behavioral shifts, slight mutations in some species. But the longer they studied, the more the depth of the changes became apparent. It wasn't just that the creatures were acting differently. It was that they were changing in ways that couldn't be explained by normal evolutionary patterns. Dr. Laura Fields, the marine biologist leading the study, was the first to notice the oddities in the deep-sea specimens. The team had already observed several species becoming more aggressive, more territorial, but when Dr. Fields examined one of the larger squid specimens under her microscope, she saw something else, something that took her breath away. The squid's neural tissue had been completely restructured, not in a gradual natural way, but in a sudden burst of rapid, almost unnatural growth. Its brain was larger, more complex, and its neural pathways, once simple and reflexive, had expanded. It was as though the creature had skipped over several evolutionary steps, accelerating its development far beyond what should have been possible. She felt a strange chill run through her. This wasn't just the influence of radiation. This was something more. The creatures weren't just adapting, they were evolving. And rapidly. When Dr. Fields reported her findings to the team, they immediately started running genetic sequencing on a variety of organisms from the ocean depths. The results were nothing short of breathtaking. Species once thought extinct or locked in ancient, fossilized states were now revitalized. But it wasn't just a return to a previous state. They had evolved new traits. Traits that made them more resilient, more powerful, and, strangely, more intelligent. A previously dormant species of giant deep-sea fish, once believed to have disappeared during the last ice age, was found alive again in the Mariana Trench. But what startled the scientists wasn't just the fish's return. It was the fact that it now showed signs of advanced cognitive behavior. The fish appeared to cooperate in hunting, using complex strategies to corner prey, something they had never exhibited before. Even more disturbing was the squid's change. Its intelligence was growing at a terrifying rate, with its nervous system responding in ways that didn't align with its evolutionary history. It was thinking. It was learning. Something in the cosmic radiation had rewired the very building blocks of their biology. Ancient genetic pathways, long thought dormant, fossilized in time, had awakened, evolving creatures that should never have seen the light of day. The realization hit the team like a wave. These creatures had not simply been reintroduced to the world. They were being reborn in a new form. Their biology wasn't just altered. It was contaminated by forces beyond anything they could understand. These creatures weren't adapting naturally to the radiation. They were being coaxed into something else, something unnatural. Dr. Fields paused, staring at the genetic readout. The readings weren't just strange. They were impossible. There were patterns forming in the DNA. Sequences that should never have aligned. These creatures weren't just evolving in response to their environment. They were responding to something more. A force that wasn't natural but external. Something outside of time. Outside of evolution. The team gathered around Dr. Fields, looking at the data. The pieces were starting to fall into place. The cosmic radiation wasn't just acting like a stimulant to accelerate evolutionary processes, it was rewriting them entirely. The creatures weren't evolving in any natural, organic way. They were being forced to evolve, forced to adapt in a manner they were never meant to. A deep sense of dread settled over the team. These creatures weren't evolving into something better. They were evolving into something else, something that could be dangerous. The patterns in their behavior and biology were taking on unsettling characteristics. The more they observed, the more they realized that these creatures were not simply growing, they were changing their own nature. It was as if they were being molded, manipulated. And as the months went on, the team began to witness changes in behavior that could only be described as unnerving. The giant squid, for example, began displaying more coordinated attacks, not just on prey, but on each other. Marine biologists had always known that deep-sea predators could be territorial, but this was different. These creatures were becoming social in ways that were completely unnatural. They were forming groups, cooperating and hunting together, much like a predatory society. It wasn't just about survival anymore. These creatures were changing their biology to fit a new reality, one shaped by the radiation, a reality that wasn't just harsh but alien. As Dr. Fields and her team continued their study, a chilling thought began to settle in. If the cosmic radiation had this kind of influence, what would happen next? If the creatures were capable of evolving so quickly, how long would it take for them to evolve into something unrecognizable? And worse yet, how long before they started adapting to the surface world? These creatures, once thought fossilized, now seemed to be learning, growing, adapting in ways they were never meant to. The ocean had awakened, and it was no longer just biological. It was something else. The abyss is not just empty space. It's a memory. For centuries, the creatures of the deep lived out of sight, undisturbed by the world above. They adapted to their environment slowly, in darkness, deep beneath the surface of the ocean. The deep trenches were their kingdom, a place of primordial stillness. The world above moved on, unaware of the strange ancient creatures that called the dark depths home. But now, the ocean's dark forgotten ones had returned, not by their own will, not by nature's course. They had been awakened. And with their awakening came something far worse than mere survival. Marine expeditions, launched to investigate the increasingly disturbing changes, began to pull creatures from the trenches, monsters that hadn't been seen in millennia. At first, the findings seemed like simple anomalies. Deep-sea creatures usually kept to themselves, hidden away from human eyes. But these creatures were different. They were alive, yes, but changed. One of the first creatures the team discovered was a bioluminescent eel that seemed to glow from within, its eyes gleaming with an eerie light, piercing through the ocean's pitch-black depths like alien lanterns. The light was unnaturally bright, a flash of green-blue that hadn't existed in nature before. It wasn't just a reflection of its environment. It was as if the eel had learned to shine in the absence of light, like it was now an answer to a question that had never been asked. And that was just the beginning. The team pulled up other creatures, their features even more impossible. Tentacles long and sinuous, with patterns that resembled ancient sea monsters. Curved designs that moved, almost like tattoos, shifting across the creature's skin in complex geometric patterns. These markings weren't random. They appeared purposeful, like something alive had carved them into the very flesh of the creatures. But the real horror began when they observed the giant squid. Once believed to be a relic of the past, these creatures had never been seen alive in modern times. Yet here it was, caught in the net, its body larger than any squid recorded in history. Size too were different, more intelligent somehow. They observed the researchers, seeming to recognize them, following their movements in a way that no natural creature ever had. The team tried to approach the squid, hoping to study it, but its movements were unerringly coordinated. It didn't react like an animal driven by instinct. It responded strategically, as if it were part of a larger design. And when it swam away, the team couldn't shake the feeling that it was not just escaping. It was retreating from something. The creatures didn't just act differently. They were evolving at an unnatural rate. These were not the same creatures they had catalogued before.
Well,
These animals had been changed, not physically alone but in their very essence. They began to coordinate with each other in ways that didn't make sense. Predators, once solitary, were now hunting in groups. Eels swam in strange formations, their bioluminescence flickering together, almost like they were communicating. The giant squids, weren't attacking. They were moving as one, swirling in synchronized motions that no known animal behavior could explain. They were organizing, and with it came the chilling thought that these creatures had learned something from the radiation that had been injected into the ocean's depths. As Dr. Laura Fields examined the patterns in the creatures' behavior, something far more disturbing emerged. The team's genetic analysis revealed that these creatures had evolved rapidly. Their biological makeup wasn't just adapting to the environment, it was rewriting itself, like a forgotten species calling upon ancient genetic pathways. What was more unsettling was that this wasn't a natural evolutionary leap. It was a forced change. The cosmic radiation wasn't just awakening old dormant genes, it was actively programming them, reprogramming their biology. And when they compared the genetic data to that of creatures thought to be extinct, it became clear. The radiation wasn't just awakening the ancient creatures, it was recreating them. They were returning but distorted, evolving too quickly, behaving unnaturally. The real horror wasn't in the creatures themselves. It was in the memory they carried. The radiation hadn't just awakened them. It had reconnected them to an ancient past, to instincts long buried beneath eons of evolutionary change. The abyss was remembering. Dr. Fields stared at the data with a growing sense of unease. The creatures weren't just responding to the environment. They were responding to something older. A primal call that had been buried in their genetic code. They had remembered how to move, how to hunt, how to survive. But they had also remembered something far darker. How to organize. There was no doubt about it anymore. The abyss was not just a place of darkness and mystery. It was a place of recollection. A repository of ancient life forms, forgotten by time and hidden from the world above. The cosmic radiation had cracked open the deep ocean's tomb, revealing creatures that should have stayed buried in the dark. And as the creatures stirred, the team realized the terrifying truth. The ocean was no longer the unseen kingdom it had been. It was a time capsule, a prison for life forms that had been locked away. And now they were waking. The deep ocean was meant to be a place of seclusion, place of stillness, where life had evolved in isolation, untouched by the world above. But as the creatures of the abyss began to stir, it became clear that the ocean was no longer a silent kingdom. It had become a nursery for something far older and more dangerous. Beasts that had once been forgotten by time, but were now being reconstructed by the cosmic radiation. The team had been aware of the changes in the deep-sea creatures, how their behaviors had shifted, how their biology was evolving at an accelerated rate. But they hadn't expected this. The creatures weren't just returning. They were becoming something else. The first signs came when a research vessel near the Mariana Trench sent out a distress signal. Its communications were brief, frantic. Something was attacking the ship. The crew had spotted massive tentacles wrapping around the vessel's hull, pulling it toward the deep. The ship's sonar detected gigantic shapes moving through the water, too large for any known sea creature. They were fast, too fast for anything that should have existed at those depths. And then there was silence. The vessel was lost. The crew vanished, and no trace of the ship was ever recovered. Just a faint signal from the wreckage, gone as quickly as it had come. The team on shore immediately suspected the mutated deep-sea creatures. What had been aggressive behavior was now something coordinated. But the true horror came when they realized the pattern. These creatures weren't just attacking randomly. They were organizing like a pack, like a collective intelligence. A few days later, a research station near the coast of Alaska was breached. Its underwater drilling equipment, used for studying tectonic shifts, had been damaged. But it wasn't the equipment that was the target. It was the station itself. The researchers watched in disbelief as massive bioluminescent shapes emerged from the depths. creatures once thought to be mythical, giant squids with spines running down their backs, multi-eyed crustaceans, and serpentine beings with swirling, hypnotic patterns. They were no longer lurking in the trenches. They were now coming for the surface. The team had no way to stop them. As more research stations fell victim to the creatures' coordinated attacks, the team realized the situation was spiraling out of control. The mutated life forms weren't just becoming stronger, they were adapting. They were changing their physiology to survive in the surface world. Powers they once held in isolation, bioluminescence, pressure resistance, enhanced strength, were now being amplified by the radiation. In laboratories around the world, the scientists raced to develop countermeasures. But as the creatures adapted, so too did their tactics. The once hidden abyssal monsters were becoming something new, something far more terrifying. They were not just returning from the ocean, they were now becoming beasts of the surface world. Then came the final revelation. The radiation wasn't confined to the oceans anymore. It had begun to spread. It wasn't just affecting the creatures beneath the waves. It was now affecting the entire ecosystem. The atmosphere itself was shifting. Atmospheric sensors began picking up unusual radiation patterns, small bursts that had been spreading for months unnoticed. The radiation was not just emanating from the ocean depths, but was rising. A slow, creeping rise in global temperatures, strange disturbances in weather patterns, and inexplicable shifts in atmospheric composition, none of which could be linked to human activity or climate change. As the creatures grew in size and strength, the radiation spread into the air, mutating life on land as well. Insects began showing strange patterns, and even mammals were affected. Some began exhibiting behaviors more like their sea-dwelling ancestors: heightened aggression, increased metabolism, and strange bioluminescent markings. The scientists were horrified to discover that the radiation wasn't just a one-time event. It was a continuous process, spreading from the ocean's depths to the surface world. The ancient creatures, long thought to be locked in the ocean, were no longer confined. They were adapting to the surface, and the radiation was helping them evolve at a terrifying pace. With each passing day, the creatures' reach grew further. The world above, once peaceful, was now a place of constant vigilance. Entire coastlines had been abandoned, cities prepared for the threat of sea creatures crawling ashore. The oceans had become alive, and the surface was no longer safe. The team had done everything they could, but the realization was too late. The creatures weren't just adapting to their environment, they were becoming part of it. In the final moments of the story, Dr. Field stood at the edge of the coastline, watching the ocean waves crash against the shore. The creatures had not just come back. They were now part of the world, and the horror was in knowing that they were no longer just legends. They were reality. The beasts of the deep had risen, and now the earth was theirs.